So welcome to World of Writecraft. This is kind of like the tailor end of the series for Dark Choices. We've finished the rough draft, and now we're going to be working on the rough draft. So we're editing, going to read through it. Pretty sure we'll get through all of it today. If not, that's fine. But this is probably going to be the last Dark Choices centered story. I'm not sure what's going to come next. I might do I have a short story that I have planned. Really got into it, and I have outlined most of the story. Probably about no, that's not true. In my head, I've outlined most of the story. I've written down probably about a third of it, the outline. So I am doing the outline of the story offline, but I plan on doing the whole story online, just like I did with Dark Choices, except I didn't start streaming Dark Choices until I'd started a few pages already. But this next project is going to be all online. I also want to work on my novel a little bit and maybe work on some Shattered Kingdoms lore. I want to work that in somewhere. So I don't know exactly what we'll be doing next, but we're continuing on this right train and not stopping. And the next story actually features these three characters just at a different time. These short stories are really just my way of filling out the world lore in the background, because these are like pivotal moments in the background of the novel I'm writing. So this is stuff that I might not normally have ever shared, but I plan on sharing all this stuff. That's why I'm doing it online. But this is like Silmarillion level stuff. And I'm just working with it and giving it story form. So I'm going to take a drink of my apple cider, which I love apple cider. I don't get it very often. It's almost the end of the year. But yeah. Alright, so I'll start reading, and along the way, I will stop and do edits. So this isn't just like a reading of the story, it's editing too. I do plan on doing a YouTube video where I do an introduction, and then I do a reading and stuff like that. Once we're done with the rough draft, and I've edited enough to my specifications. Even if I have to edit it after the stream, I might do that. But I want to try and do it all on screen. But we were editing along the way, so there's no guarantee that there will be a lot to actually pick apart. But I'm sure there are some things. Alright, let's get into it. Dark Choices by Joshua Miller. Christopher, a man in his late teens, had his book satchel slung over his shoulder as he was walking home from the library. It was late fall, and despite it being dinner time, the sun was already down. The street was only slightly lit up from the few streetlights. He wore a deep red windbreaker to keep out the colder than usual air, the same cold that was keeping the street empty of people. It was silent still. It was silent till Christopher heard sounds of a struggle down an alleyway he was passing. That sounds okay. I thought about adding more details about Christopher. Let's make it a brown satchel bag, brown book bag, book satchel, brown. I hate talking about descriptions because I feel like I'm just doing a list. So I don't do descriptions as fully, and I kind of add details as I go on and I continue to talk about them. Like height is really difficult for me. Because I want to just say, he's 5'8", but no, that doesn't sound right. You don't just flat out say the height unless you make it into an interesting reason why you're able to say that, like booking a person at a police station or something like that. But yeah, generally you don't just say the height, you compare it to other people's height. So over time it builds up a height chart, I guess. I don't know. Weird little quirks, I guess. He stopped and peered down the alleyway. It was made up of a 4-story building on one side and a 5-story building on the other. It took a few moments for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. He could just make out that there were 3 white men in their mid-20s. And a man holding a black woman. No, that doesn't make sense. He could just make out that there were 3 white men in their mid-20s manhandling. Oh. Fixed it. 2 of them were holding the woman against the wall while the leader was talking to the woman up close. Christopher's face hardened as he realized what was happening. Quietly put down his satchel and snuck into the alley. He moved silently up to the group, so much so that the leader, who was about to strike the woman, was taken aback as Christopher said, "Let her go." The man slightly jumped and faced Christopher and said laughingly, "Or what?" Christopher narrowed his eyes. "Or I'll make you." Christopher... Okay. The man stopped laughing and pulled out a switchblade. "Get out of here, I'll..." Before the man could finish what he was saying, Christopher kicked him in the groin, throat punched him, did a wheel kick, and sent the man flying, unconscious, to the ground. He then turned his attention to the 2 men holding the woman against the wall. All 3 of them were locked. All 3 of them looked at him with surprise. "Let her go." At Christopher's words, the men came out of their momentary shock. They both shoved the woman against Christopher and ran down the alleyway away from him. Christopher caught the woman and looked down into her eyes, his face softening. "You're safe now." The woman stared into his eyes as her own eyes began to fill with water. She began to cry on his shoulder. After a few moments, they began to walk out of the alley with her leaning on him. Once they were back on the street, she thanked him and they parted ways. She walked down the street in the opposite direction he was going. Before continuing home, he bent over to pick up his book satchel. After straightening up, he shivered slightly. It was the oddest feeling. He looked back down the alleyway, but there was nothing there, not even the man he knocked out. He shrugged, thinking to himself, he must have just woken up and walked away. He continued his walk home. Also, I could have some music playing. Let's get that music playing. Hopefully that's not too loud. Just realized it wasn't playing. So if it's too loud, let me know, but it should be fine. Draven looked down into the alleyway from atop a 4-story building. In the alleyway, there was a struggle. 3 men were attacking a woman. They had her up against the wall. He sighed as he prepared to jump down. "Is this really the best I could find tonight?" he thought to himself. He was about to jump down as he saw a young man enter the alleyway. He looked several years younger than the men attacking the woman. Draven thought the young man was moving surprisingly silent. Oh, okay, that's why it's right. It's wrong. Surprisingly silent towards the attackers. Okay, that music is annoying. I'm turning that down a little bit. Sorry. Don't usually read when I edit when I'm editing alone, so the music doesn't usually bother me. Me trying to talk over the music is it's kind of getting to me. All right, I turned down. That's better. Draven watched as the man approached them. The man in the red jacket took down one opponent in such a way that Draven was mildly impressed. He was disappointed the young man didn't give the others the same treatment. As the man began to escort the woman out of the alleyway, Draven dropped down the 4 stories, as silently as a feather, to the alley floor. He reached down, picked up the ruffian by the neck, and held him up. "I love him," shook his head. Pathetic. He looked back down the alleyway as the man in the red jacket was straightening back up from picking up his book satchel. Draven jumped back up where he had stood on the roof just as smoothly as he had dropped. However, this time he carried the body of the young ruffian in one hand. He watched from above as the other man looked quizzically down the alleyway before walking down the street. I think I'm going to say before continuing down the street. I think I said walking too much. Draven raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Did he sense me? Draven looked back to the body in his hand. He brought the body closer. I think I can say he brought it closer. He brought it closer, opened his mouth, and sunk his teeth into the young man's neck. He didn't stop drinking until the body was drained of its life-giving essence. He removed his teeth from the lifeless corpse, slightly bit the inside of his lips. Using the blood on his tongue, he licked the wounds, causing them to heal. He then dropped the body off the side of the building in an attempt to make it look like he had fallen over the edge of the building. Draven then jumped to the next building and looked down the street for the young man with the satchel. I'm not sure if he uses it with the satchel. Yeah, I'm not going to add that. It feels like it sticks out there. It makes sense, but it sticks out there. Draven then jumped to the next building and looked down the street for the young man. He caught sight of him and jumped from roof to roof, following him. Eventually, the young man entered a 3-story townhouse. Draven spent the rest of the evening sitting on the roof listening into the home. Eventually, the family went to bed. At the end of the evening, he learned the boy was going to the local college and lived with his parents at home. He also learned that the boy's name was Christopher, and he had a large family, with several brothers, all of who had moved out. Tomorrow he was going to spend the day at school and meet his uncle for lunch between classes. Alright, so I think that flows alright. I remember this is a paragraph that I went back and fixed and added new content to, but the flow seems okay. So I don't think I need to add any more about his family. I'm going to say with several older brothers though. So it's more obvious that he is the younger brother. After everyone had gone to bed in the house, I don't think I need to say in the house. After everyone had gone to bed, Draven sat on the roof a bit longer thinking. There is something about this Christopher. He intrigues me. Something about the way he fights. Then there is that moment where I was sure he could sense me. Exceedingly rare. Very unexplained. Draven looked over the night scene. The lights were cluttering up the view. The buildings were breaking the wind up in unnatural patterns. And the smell of civilization clung to the air. It's different throughout the centuries, but there was always a familiar scent when it came to civilizations. It had been a long time since he had found any human mildly interesting. He nodded as he made up his mind. I'll follow him tomorrow and see how interesting this Christopher might be. I'll follow this. I will. Well, I gotta actually read this correctly. Yeah, I'm just editing the story. This is the last time it will be on a stream, probably. I just wanted to do my last edit online. So we're going to read the whole thing. I imagine it'll take like an hour, 2 hours, and then it'll be done. I might edit some of it afterwards, but probably all of it will be done today. Now, I was tripping up over what I had him say, so I'm going to try reading this out loud again. I'll follow him tomorrow and see how interesting this Christopher person might be. I don't know why that's hard for me to say. I think it works. I'm not going to change it. He jumped down off the roof and walked back to the hotel. After all, he had school tomorrow. It was a cool fall day. The ground was covered in golden brown leaves. Despite the cool air... saying cool too often. I think when I say it's a crisp fall day. Alright, it was a... Now I gotta spell crisp correctly. It was a crisp fall day. The ground was covered in golden brown leaves. Despite the cool air, the sun beamed down, keeping Christopher warm, with the help of his jacket, of course. Christopher was not surprised his uncle would choose to eat on the patio. He set his book satchel down next to his chair and took a seat. It was long before his Uncle Oliver joined him at the table. His uncle was older than him, but he wasn't sure by how much. He always thought he looked like he was in his 20s, but he might be in his early 30s. He wasn't his real uncle, of course. He was just a family friend. He was close enough to be... He was close enough to the family that he was just always Uncle Oliver. His earliest memories of his uncle were in first grade, when he first started training him in martial arts. Don't need to say first twice. His earliest memories of his uncle were in first grade, when he started training him in martial arts. That sounds better. As his uncle sat down, Christopher greeted him. "Hello, Uncle Oliver." Oliver scooted his chair towards the table as he spoke. "Christopher, thanks for joining me for lunch. How was your morning at school?" "It was okay, Uncle. I'm not a fan of world history, though. I'm not even sure why you insist on me taking liberal art classes. I don't like book studying. I'm more physical than that." His uncle nodded. "You may not like studying, but you're good at it. I understand you don't like it, but it's necessary." Christopher slumped back in his chair and half-heartedly picked up his menu. "I know, you and my parents want me to do this, but it doesn't feel right. I'd rather pursue my fighting." "That's the one thing I do enjoy studying." Oliver sighed. "I know, and you're good at fighting, but that's not all there is in the world. It's important to learn about the past. It's to learn about other cultures. It gives you insight into how other people think and behave. It helps you decide on what kind of person you would like to become. You're young, you're only 18, you have a whole life ahead of you. This is only your first term. You'll get used to the workload." Christopher put down his menu. "It's not the workload, Uncle. I can cope with the work. I can cope with the extra work. I just sit in class, and I don't want to be there. It puts me on edge. My mind is full of developing myself to be the best fighter. I want to get into boxing. I know you don't want me to, but it's something I've always wanted to do." Oliver sighed. "I know, but you have time. You're still young. Tell you what, we will continue your training. If after college you still want to try your hand at boxing, you can." Christopher perked up slightly. Are you serious, Uncle? What about my parents?" Oliver waved off Christopher's concerns. "I'll talk to your parents. They may not be happy, but they might not be happy, but they will come around. In the meantime, focus on your work. I'll take care of your parents. Just make sure you get good grades. If you don't, I will stop training you." Christopher was a bit surprised. He wanted his uncle to keep training him. He had been training him since the age of 10. He got a serious look on his face and nodded. "Of course, Uncle. I'll do my best." The waitress approached the table. "Have you two decided what you'd like?" Christopher smiled and looked up at the waitress. "Yes. I'd like a turkey club and a glass of orange juice." The waitress wrote down his order and looked over at Oliver. "What about you, dear?" Oliver looked up at the waitress. "I'll take a water meatloaf with mashed potatoes." She wrote down his order and looked back up. "Sounds wonderful. I'll get them to start work on it right away." She put her order book in her apron pocket and walked away. Oliver leaned forward and half whispered to Christopher, like he was sharing a secret. "I might even consider becoming your coach and managing you too, if you decide to go with boxing after college." Christopher was beaming. "For real, Uncle? You would do that?" Oliver nodded. "Of course, you're my favorite nephew. I don't think you should do it, but if you do, I want to be there to support you and make sure no one takes advantage of you." Christopher began to speak. "Thank you, Uncle. I really appreciate..." but stopped as Oliver stood up abruptly. Oliver moved his head once from right to left, scanning the courtyard, ignoring Christopher. Christopher looked up at his uncle. "Is something wrong, Uncle?" Oliver continued to scan into the crowd. He had a look of concentration on his face, but as quickly as he had changed, he changed back. He looked down at his nephew, and the stone look on his face fell off, and then the warm smile returned. "No, nothing is wrong. It's nothing. Thought I saw someone is all." He sat back down and changed the topic. "Did you hear? There was a murder near your house last night? A man named Frank Owens." His uncle... No, Uncle, I didn't. His uncle nodded. It was in an alley a few minutes' walk from your house. Christopher tensed up slightly, thinking back to his fight. I did punch him in the throat. Was it too hard? Didn't he walk away? He asked his uncle. Did they say how he died? Oliver shook his head. No, they didn't say how the man died. Just that he was found in the alleyway dead. Christopher shifted slightly in his seat. Uncle, something happened last night. Oliver raised an eyebrow and let Christopher continue. Last night I got into a fight. Paused a moment, thinking that Oliver was going to react. He had always been taught to use his martial arts only in self-defense. To his surprise, Oliver didn't. I need to add react, I think. To his surprise, Oliver didn't react, and Christopher continued. There were these 3 men, and they were harassing this woman. It looked like they were about to rape her. I couldn't let them be. I attacked the leader, and he went unconscious, and the other 2 ran. But what is it suggested here? Brains. I left the man in the alley. I thought he got up and walked away, but it was dark. Maybe he was still there. Christopher paused. Uncle? Did I kill a man? Oliver leaned in and spoke at a near whisper. He had a serious look in his eyes. I don't know. But I will find out. Don't tell anyone about this. Just go about like nothing happened. You did the right thing, no matter what. Remember that. He leaned back, the concerned look on his face disappearing. Now, let's not speak of this again. You don't have to worry. Christopher looked at his uncle suspiciously. He didn't understand why his uncle was so calm. If I killed someone, how could he take care of it? I've always trusted my uncle, but if it's true and I killed someone, how can I live with myself? The food arrived. It looked fresh, but for some reason, Christopher no longer had much of an appetite. I'm glad I'm editing. I am finding things. Draven got up early to make sure he had the right clothing to blend in on campus. Draven tried to dress up like a college youth, but he had admitted to himself that he was not with the times. Yet he managed to do a pretty good job. He even went out and bought a book bag and put some books in to complete the disguise. He had been following Christopher ever since he had left school. Nothing all that unique happened. He followed Christopher all morning, including 2 classes. Draven hadn't gotten into the classroom himself. He sat in the hallway and was able to hear the classroom well enough. The first class, they were discussing the book. I finally figured out what book I wanted to pick. I'm picking the novella, The Metamorphosis. The first class, they were discussing the book The Metamorphosis by Kafka. The second class he went to was a history course. They were discussing the 30 Years' War in Europe. In both classes, Draven couldn't see what he was doing, but he never heard him speak, so he assumed he had no questions. Both classes were lectures. I feel like I'm reading a list. I don't like that feeling. Don't like that feeling at all. I need to figure out how to break this up a little bit. Yeah, I'm going to add a paragraph here. I think I'm going to add in about Draven just kind of sitting in the hallway, listening in on the conversation and being kind of bored, just to break up the list and put some concrete actions and like ground the story here, so it's not just like a list. Okay, let's see. I wrote a new paragraph. Let's see what it sounds like. So, the last paragraph ends with the first class they were discussing in the book, The Metamorphosis by Kafka. Draven sat on the bench around the corner from the room's front door. That's possessive, and a little mark there. He had never had much use for academia, but he did pick up an affinity for books over the years. There was always something new to read. He had heard of Kafka, but was still working on finishing books from centuries before the man was even born. Still, he found himself skipping ahead in his reading and reading modern books from time to time. He felt it helped him assimilate in cultures better. Okay, I think that breaks it up better. The second class, he was... I'm going to change this sentence here. The second class Draven followed Christopher to was his history course. They were discussing the 30 Years' War in Europe. In both classes, Draven couldn't see what he was doing, but he never heard him speak, so he assumed he had no questions. Both classes were lectures. So I'm going to add in some details here, because it still seems kind of like a list. So I'm going to add in some personal details about Draven here in the 30 Years' War. They were discussing the 30 Years' War in Europe. I think this sounds better. Second class, Draven followed Christopher 2 was his history course. They were discussing the 30 Years' War in Europe. Based on the details they mentioned, Draven was fairly sure he took part in that conflict. It always amused him to hear about events from a mortal's perspective. In both classes, Draven couldn't see what Christopher was doing, but never heard him speak. So he assumed he had no questions. Both classes were lectures. I'm not going to put that last sentence there. That doesn't need to be there. Alright. Between classes, Christopher sat in the courtyard and read his history textbook. After his class, Draven followed Christopher to a little cafe near campus. In fact, it was right next to one of the school's courtyards. Christopher took a seat at an empty table. Draven leaned up against a tree that was a good distance away from Christopher. He was in such a spot that he could still easily see and hear him. That didn't flow right. Draven leaned up against a tree that was a good distance from Christopher. He was in such a spot that he could easily see him. Sounding right to me. I gotta fix this. He was in such a spot that he could still easily see and hear. Oh, maybe it's fine. He was in such a spot that he could still easily see and hear him. He took out one of the books he was peering around. Yeah, Draven's in here. Draven took out one of the books he was carrying around, a new novel called The Black Cauldron, with the intention to use it as cover to watch Christopher. It wasn't long before the uncle came and sat at the table. Seeing the uncle, Draven's first instinct was to sneak away. He knew him. It was Theron, the last person he expected to see. He hadn't seen him in over 300 years. Actually, I have to put the word years there. And he wasn't sure he wanted to see him now. Interesting boy this people know. Interesting people this boy knows. He had fought off his instinct and continued to watch and listen. Apparently, Theron sees something in this boy. That might explain a few things. Seems this boy doesn't know how to fight. Seems the boy doesn't just know how to fight, but also lives for the fight. I'm going to say for fighting. It's clearer. Their conversation was broken up by the waitress who came and took their order. They then continued talking. Draven almost smiled as he began talking about the recent murder. Huh. He didn't say huh. Anyways, the person I had killed, so the boy is taking the blame. That could be useful. Suddenly the uncle stood up and Draven went deadly still. Can he sense me? I've overstayed my welcome. Draven quickly took a step backwards behind the tree and melded into its shadow and disappeared. Draven stepped out of the shadow of his hotel room. I hope he didn't see me. I should never have stayed as long as I did. This is getting interesting. It was a few days later in the evening when Christopher was walking home through a park. He had stayed late again, working with a group from his history class. It was boring and tedious, but he was going to do his best. He wanted to make his family proud, and of course make sure his uncle would follow through with him helping in starting his boxing career. Still, he could not help but feel a sense of guilt and dread over the unknown fate of the man in the alley. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had taken a life. He played the moment over and over again in his mind. He could have gone for a less sensitive area than his windpipe. He now knew why his uncle always taught him to avoid fighting. He never knew what it was. You never know what is going to happen. The night air was crisp. The recent rain brought a freshness to the air. The clouds were broken up, and you could periodically see the half moon that hung in the air. That's probably one word. Yep. Christopher was walking along the path that took him by the bathrooms. He was deep in his own thoughts when the two men that had been sitting in the alleyway a few days ago, came out from behind the bathrooms. One was holding a stick in his hand, the other had a chain wrapped around his right hand. They moved onto the path, blocking Christopher. Christopher heard movement behind him and glanced back. Three other men walked from behind the bathroom, surrounding him. One of them carried a bat, another carried a knife, and the third person was wearing brass knuckles on his hand. Christopher looked back at the man with the stick, standing in front of him, and spoke. You killed Frank, or some Negro woman. Christopher casually unslung his book satchel. I didn't kill anyone. I stopped Frank and you from raping that woman. Christopher had never had to fight more than one person before, but he had been practicing for this for most of his life. He needed to separate the group more and fight as few of them at once as possible. He decided he would stop the one in front of him with the stick first, then turn to the man with the chain. If he was lucky, he would be able to break from the pack and run away. If he was too slow, the three men behind him would be able to attack him. The man with the stick growled as he spoke. Bullshit, you killed him. The cops wouldn't listen to us, but we know you. The man grunted as the satchel that Christopher was carrying launched into his chest. The man stumbled backwards. Christopher lunged forward, pushing the man back a few steps further. He grabbed the wrist of the arm holding the stick, twisted it, and made him drop it. Christopher grabbed the stick mid-air as it fell. The man swung with his left hand, but Christopher sidestepped. Christopher then used the stick to hit the man in the stomach, knocking the air out of him. He then punched the man in the jaw with his open hand. I'm going to say his other hand. and the man crumpled to the ground unconscious. Christopher turned to face the man with the chain. He was punched in the side of his face above his eye from the hand wrapped in the chain. He looked. He took a half step back at the impact. The momentary shock of metal hitting his face quickly passed. He recovered just in time. The man started to take another swing. Christopher used his stick to bash the man's arm and moved it. Christopher grabbed the man, using the stick as leverage, fell backwards and threw the man behind him onto the ground. Christopher quickly followed that up by smashing his fist into the man's head, incapacitating him. Christopher expected that the other three people had taken the time to move in when he was momentarily dazed. He quickly got to his feet and glanced back. He hoped he had enough space between him and the other three so that he could run away. Christopher did not expect to see what he saw. While the adrenaline was still running, he was shocked out of the fighting urgency he had a moment ago. Sitting there over the bodies of three people was one man. He stood just at the edge of the light that was being put out by the streetlight. He was standing perfectly still in a long brown trench coat. As the wind blew, his black hair moved and his trench coat flapped. In the moments that passed, a few leaves fell off the nearby trees, streaking across the scene. The man broke the silence first. You fight precision. It should be you fight with precision. But there is room for improvement. Your Uncle Oliver has taught you well. Christopher was grateful for the man's help, but he still felt on edge, and it wasn't just adrenaline. The man gave off an aura unlike anyone else. He had met few people who had the presence this man had. Uncle Oliver was one of them. His uncle made him feel like he was safe, but he sometimes got the impression that he unnerved other people. This character had a similar presence, but he didn't feel safe. He felt like he should run, but he held his ground. Thank you for helping me, but how do you know Uncle Oliver, and how do you know he taught me? Alright, so I need to change a couple things in this, I think, to match some lore and powers that I want Christopher to have. I'm trying to, just a few words here and there. Because right now it seems more like charisma, and I want to go beyond charisma. Man gave off an aura unlike anyone else. He met a few people who had the presence this man had. Uncle Oliver is one of them. His uncle may have made him feel safe, usually. I'm gonna make it a little bit more certain there. His uncle usually made him feel like he was safe, but he sometimes got the impression that he unnerved. No. But he sometimes got the impression that he unnerved other people. Alright, I think I fixed it to how I'd like. Read that paragraph over again. Christopher was grateful for the man's help, but he still felt on edge, and it wasn't just adrenaline. The man gave off an aura unlike anyone else. He had met few people who had the presence this man had. Uncle Oliver was one of them. His uncle usually made him feel like he was safe, but he sometimes got the impression that he unnerved other people. It wasn't as simple as that, though. There is a visceral quality to the feeling with it when it came. There's a visceral quality to the feeling when it came to his uncle and this man. It wasn't just raw charisma. This character had a similar presence, but he didn't feel safe. He felt like he should run. But he held his ground. Thank you for helping me, but how do you know Uncle Oliver, and how do you know he taught me? The man smiled ever so slightly. I've known the man I've known the man you know as Oliver for a long time. If you want to know how I know it, that's a tale for him to tell. I knew he taught you because I could see it in the way that you fought. It's subtle, but I can see his hand in your teaching. Christopher ignored the fact that this person didn't answer his question and moved the conversation on. Thank you for helping me. I wasn't sure I was going to make it out alive. What's your name so I can thank you properly? My name is Draven. Christopher was careful not to let the surprise over the unusual name show on his face. He walked towards Draven and extended his hand. Draven extended his own, and they shook as Christopher spoke. Thank you, Draven. You may have saved my life. Draven's hand was cold to the touch, and very rigid. His grasp was very firm. It felt like rock. Despite acting normal, Christopher was very uneasy. He still felt like running. He wanted to get this interaction over with as fast as he could. If there is anything I can do for you, let me know. It was late though, and I should be getting along. Draven's smile didn't make Christopher feel like escaping. I'm sure I'll be able to find you a fight aside to collect on that debt. Give Oliver my best. Christopher said, Of course. He turned around, dropped the stick, and picked up his book satchel. He headed towards home once again. He did his best to maintain a casual walking pace, but as soon as he turned the corner in the trail, he took off running and didn't stop till he got home. The next morning, Christopher jogged the few miles to his uncle's house. His uncle had been out of town for the last few weeks, and they hadn't had a chance to do any martial practice. He walked up the steps to the house and knocked on the door. The door opened with Oliver standing on the other side. He smiled. Good morning, come in. I see you've done your warm-up already. Very good. Christopher walked in and his uncle closed the door. Good morning, Uncle. Oliver asked, How are your parents? Christopher answered, They're good. They took a trip to the lake for the weekend now. They won't be back till Monday. I talked to my brother John the other day. He's changed and said they won't be back till Sunday. I think it's more appropriate. Oh, famous guy. Oh no, what are you doing to me? Let me see if I can delete this. Sorry, I know I can figure this out. I'm going to Twitch to do it. Sorry, it's taking a second. Bam. Alright, sorry I had to do some moderating there. Back to the story. Put up my. There we go. Alright. Let's see, where are we? Well, howdy, parents. Trip. Yep, read that. Changed from Monday to Sunday. I talked to my brother John the other day too. That's when Oliver noticed the cut above Christopher's eye and interrupted. Oliver reached out with a hand and lightly outlined the cut above the eye with his finger. What happened here? Christopher lowered his head. Uncle, I got into another fight. Two of the men from the alley confronted me. They also brought three of their friends. I thought they were going to kill me. They said I killed their friend Frank. Oliver gently lifted Christopher's head and looked into his eyes. You didn't kill anyone. I talked to the police. The man Frank died from a broken neck and a cracked skull. It looked like he fell off the building. They were ruling it an accident. The relief in Christopher's eyes was obvious. So I didn't kill him? No, you didn't. Now don't think about it again. Oliver turned and walked down the hall into the dining room and out the back door. Christopher followed. Oliver had a large backyard even for the outskirts of the city. There was even a second building in the backyard. It was a workshop at one point, but Oliver had it converted into a dojo. He continued to the building, but Christopher stopped in the middle of the yard and spoke. Uncle, do you know a man named Draven? Oliver immediately stopped. There was a momentary pause before he turned around. Craven, that sounds familiar. Why do you ask? Christopher hesitated a moment. Well, he helped me in the fight. He took out the 3 men behind me. I don't know if I would have survived without him. Oliver raised an eyebrow. What did this person look like? So about 5 feet 10, 5 feet 11. Either he had dark brown hair or black, I couldn't tell, it was too dark. He had green eyes. I didn't see him fight, but he must be a fighter. His grip was as firm as rock, and he did take out 3 men without breaking a sweat. I don't know why, but he made me feel very uneasy. It took everything he had not to run away. Oliver nodded. Oh yes, Craven, I know him. I've not seen or heard of him in a long time. Shall we continue? Okay, Uncle. Christopher wanted to ask more, but his uncle obviously didn't want to talk about Craven, and when Oliver didn't want to talk about a subject, he didn't. He had learned better than to push when his uncle was like this. If it was important, he would tell him about it. That didn't make it any less annoying to Christopher. Christopher followed Oliver into the dojo. It was a large empty space with a clean cement floor. There were various weapons hung up on the walls, from swords to spears, even some shields. There were also training weapons, one of which Oliver walked to and picked up off the rack. There was a rattan stick about 3 feet long. He handed it to Christopher. I want you to do all the basic forms. First, put on the weighted clothes. Christopher took the stick and walked over to the chest at the end of the large room. He opened it, rummaged around, and pulled out a shirt, put it on. It had pockets on the outside where he put in metal weights. He then reached into the chest and put on weighted ankles and wristbands. Picked up the stick and moved into the middle of the room and took a stance. He was about to begin when his uncle interrupted. And do them as slowly as you can. Make sure every movement is precise. Oliver watched him intently as Christopher worked on his forms. With the added weight, he struggled to do it as slowly as he would have liked. Nearly an hour later, his forehead was beaded with sweat, but he was done. His muscles were sore. The whole time Oliver walked around him, there was a few moments when he faltered, and Oliver had to correct him. When he was done, Oliver nodded and said, "Good job. Take a break, get some water, take off those weights. Next we'll do some sparring and see what you can do." Christopher walked over to the chest, took out the weights from his shirt and put them away. Then took off the shirt, the ankle and wrist weights and put them all into the chest. He went into the house and got a drink of water and came back out to the dojo. When he got back out, Oliver had 2 rattan sticks in hand and handed Christopher one. "Ready?" Christopher nodded. They started 10 feet apart. There were a few minutes where neither of them moved. Then Christopher shot forward and attacked. Oliver was pushed back, but he effortlessly knocked aside the swings. At one point, Christopher took a more aggressive step, unbalancing himself, and Oliver took his chance. He sidestepped Christopher and stepped forward so that he was now behind him, hitting Christopher on the back of his stick. Hitting Christopher on the back with his stick. Christopher regained his balance and turned back to his uncle. They squared off again, but this time Christopher did his best to hold off advancing, keeping his anticipation in check. This time Oliver moved in, slowly circling around Christopher. Christopher matched Oliver's movements until Oliver made a move to attack. He was testing Christopher's reactions. Eventually Oliver made a more aggressive move. He stepped into Christopher's circle of influence, knocked aside Christopher's stick, and body bashed him, sending him flying back several feet, nearly making him fall to the ground. Christopher lost patience and moved into attack his uncle, but his momentum was turned against him and he found himself laying on his back. The sparring continued for the next hour, with a few breaks in between matches. Christopher never once scored a hit on his uncle, but he did get close to landing a grapple, but was turned aside at the last moment. Today was not the day he would finally beat Oliver. They were done fighting. Oliver said that was enough for the day. Christopher went into the house and took a quick shower to rinse off the sweat. He met his uncle in the living room. "I called a cab for you. It's been a few weeks since we practiced. Why don't you give those muscles a rest? No need to jog home today." Christopher smiled. "Thanks, Uncle. It's been an exhausting day, especially after the night I had." The cab arrived and Christopher got in. He saw his uncle wave him off as he headed home. Oliver watched Christopher drive away in the cab. He went into the house and grabbed his keys, walked over to his car and got in. He caught up to the cab but kept his distance. When Christopher got home, Oliver parked his car a few blocks away and got out. He positioned himself across the street in the park. He sat down at the bench where he could monitor the area, but not in direct sight of the house. Still, when he focused, he could hear Christopher moving around inside. Oliver spent the day in the park, keeping his ears on Christopher and his eyes on the surrounding area. He was on the lookout for Draven. He didn't know the man's intentions, but it was too dangerous to allow him to follow Christopher unchecked. Every hour or so, Oliver would get up from the bench and walk around the area, but he made sure he could keep his ears on Christopher. Eventually, he heard Christopher pick up the telephone and talk to one of his friends. They made plans to go to the dance at the college with a group of friends. It was being held in the gym that evening. The whole while, Oliver was extending his senses to his surrounding areas, trying to tell if there were any vampires in the area. He knew Draven had the ability to block his sensing, but he tried anyways. Draven's ability to block it wasn't perfect, and he might slip up, allowing Oliver to pinpoint him. Several hours passed, and the night was setting in when Christopher left the house. Oliver made sure to stay out of sight, but continued to follow Christopher. They went through the park and then cut through a few alleys to get to the school. Christopher met up with his friends and they went to the gym together. Oliver stayed out of the gym and sat in a bench out front. He made sure that he was off to the side so if Christopher walked out he wouldn't obviously see him. Wouldn't immediately see him. There were people milling about out front socializing, taking a break from the dance. Oliver made sure he could still hear Christopher despite the music. It was more difficult, but he could make out him talking to his friends. He could hear. Sounds better. It was difficult, but he could hear him talking to his friends. After a time, Oliver stood up and walked around the building, keeping his ears focused on the inside and his other senses on the surrounding area. He doubted that Draven would go into the dance itself and confront Christopher, but he was ready for that eventuality. At one point, Christopher walked out of the gym to get some air. Oliver made sure to stay in the shadows so he couldn't be seen. That's when Oliver felt it, that creeping cold, that unnatural feeling, like a solar eclipse blocking out the sun. He was sure Draven was near. It was a unique feeling only Draven invoked. He increased his visual surveillance. It took a moment, but he found him. Draven, off of the distance, leaned against another building, watching Christopher. He was sure that Draven let himself be found. Oliver shot off at a blinding speed, so fast that people wouldn't be able to see him. One moment he was next to the gym, the next he was standing next to Draven. He was tense, not sure what to expect, but he was ready for whatever may come. To his credit, Draven didn't look surprised. As Oliver appeared next to him, he stopped leaning against the building and stood up straight. He looked over at Oliver. "Hello, Theron. It has been a long time. Are you hunting tonight? Have you found your prey?" Oliver stood there guarded, emotionless. "It has been a while. Why are you here?" Draven narrowed his eyes. "You didn't answer my question. Are you hunting mortals or immortals?" Oliver decided to put Draven's mind at ease and answer his question. "I don't hunt mortals anymore. As to immortals, I was seeking you out, but I wasn't hunting." Draven did not move, but Oliver sensed him tighten up, ready to strike. "So, Theron, you've decided it is my time now." "No, I shouldn't have had, but I was hunting. As to immortals, I was seeking you out." "So, Theron, you've decided it is my time now. I won't go easy. I may win. You don't have your sword." Draven nodded over to all the people in front of the gym. "Besides, you wouldn't want your precious mortals to get hurt, now would you? If we fought, they would all die." Oliver looked over to the people, then back to Draven. "Have you become so callous over the last few hundred years? I was looking for you, not to kill you, but to find out your intentions towards Christopher." Draven shrugged ever so slightly. "It's not callousness, it's practicality. I'd certainly need their blood to defeat you. I hold no ill will towards you. As to Christopher, he intrigues me. I want him." Oliver asked, "You want him? What do you want him for?" Draven stated simply, I want to make him mine, to turn him. Oliver stood there thinking, Draven wants the sight of someone? He hasn't done that before the Crusades. He hasn't done that since before the Crusades. Why now? Why Christopher? Why you? What use is he to Draven? What use is he to Draven? There we go. Oliver asked, why do you want Christopher? Draven looked off towards where Christopher was standing with his friends. He's a fighter. That's not really why. He looked back at Oliver. The other day he incapacitated my prey. Right before I fed on him, I swore. Right before I fed on him, I swear that some part of Christopher deep down sensed that I was there. I haven't seen someone like that, and he is special. I want him as mine. He has more potential than most, and I want the challenge of bringing that out. I'm going to just bring that out. Let's see. I want the challenge of bringing that out in him. Out of him. There we go. Alright, let's go read a couple sentences over again there. He's special. I want him as mine. He has more potential than most, and I want the challenge of bringing that out of him. Alright, that sounds good. Oliver was surprised, but didn't let it show. Had Christopher really sensed that Draven was near? If so, that would indeed be impressive. He was the seventh son of a seventh son. Perhaps he was too close to Christopher to notice that special gift. Oliver thought Christopher was special too. Not all seventh sons are, though. He took to his training like few people he had trained. The discipline he showed would help make for a more stable and potentially powerful vampire. He hadn't seen someone like this in a very long time either. You can't. He's under my protection. I'll be the one to decide if he'll be a vampire, and it'll be by my making. Aaron's eyes hardened, and his body tensed up more. No, he is mine. Stay out of my way this one time, or I will end you. Oliver looked at Draven surprised. He even let some of that surprise slip onto his face, and the whole time that Oliver had known him, Draven had never been willing to kill him over a mortal. What has changed? Perhaps there is another way. I too want him as my own. We should let him decide who will turn him. Draven looked over at Christopher. He stared deep in thought before turning back to Oliver. That may work. I have no desire to kill you, and I know I may well lose. We have fought many battles together, and never once were we on opposite sides. I'm willing to compromise this one time. But he must decide soon. Oliver felt a small sense of relief. He did not want to fight here, out in the open, especially where it was not on his own terms. Why must it be soon? He is still young, he has much to learn, and I don't want to turn him and make him regret not having had some resemblance of a mortal life. Draven shook his head. He is of the right age. He is a man. You have grown too accustomed to the normalcies of this age. He is ready to be turned. I will not wait. Oliver thought for a moment. Maybe he shouldn't push this. The compromise was already tenuous at best. Fine. If he chooses you, I won't stop you from turning him now. However, when the time comes, I urge you to reconsider and let him have some normalcy before bringing him into our world. Draven nodded. I will consider it. Oliver let out a mental sigh. That is something, at least. We can meet tomorrow and talk to him. I have no doubt that this will be a shock to him. Draven shook his head ever so slightly. No, I will talk to him myself. I will not force a choice on him at our next meeting, but it will be soon. At this, he turned and made ready to leave, but he looked back at Oliver. It was agreeable to see you again. I am still yours. I will join the hunt again if you find that it is necessary. As you know, I enjoy a challenge. Then he quickly moved off and disappeared into the darkness. Oliver watched as Draven disappeared. He no longer felt Draven's presence. Either he had let his guard down before to lure him in, or it had just slipped. Oliver wasn't sure. He looked over at Christopher, who was walking. Oliver wasn't sure, but it was too much of a coincidence. He looked over at Oliver, who was walking back into the gym with his friends. He had his answer. He now knew why Draven was following Christopher. He moved off towards his car and began to make his way home. We are about halfway through, and it has been about an hour. So I'm tempted to call it here and do the skin later the next week. But it's going pretty good. Didn't have to edit very much. I had a good stopping point, I think. Just yesterday I had a really long day. Didn't get to bed very early, didn't sleep very much. I'm doing okay, but I'm a little tired. I'd like to take a nap. So I'd like to thank everyone that took the time to listen to me read today. I'm sorry I'm not finishing it like I thought I was going to. I will stream the rest of this during the week before next weekend. Next weekend it will be a new project. But I don't know what day I will do this, but once I have, I'll try to make at least a day announcement at a time so you can be here to finish this story with me. And then I'm going to start using the YouTube more for finished content. So after I finish my edit on this, I will then do a reading, kind of a, I'm an amateur, but a pro edit of the story video, and they'll just be able to read or listen to the story in the background. Yeah. Thanks for making it out, and I hope to see everyone later this week. You can check the final story by typing exclamation mark story if you don't want to wait until later this week. This video will eventually be on YouTube. If you have any questions, send me a whisper, message me in chat, or get a hold of me on Facebook. Always like talking to people about my writing. Have a good afternoon.